Welcome to the Bitcoin Goes Modular panel. Excuse my voice, it's been a long week doing a lot of conversations. And today, kind of building off of Eric's talk, I think that there's a lot to be discussed on kind of the why side of things as well as the how in terms of Bitcoin going modular. So why don't we start with some introductions and then we'll jump right in. And Connor, we can start with you and go down the line.
Hi, I'm Connor. I'm a solutions engineer at Celestia Labs.
Hi, I'm Rena. I'm the COO of Stacks, the Bitcoin L2.
Hi, I'm Morkon. I'm co-founder of Citrea, Bitcoin's first CK rollup.
Awesome. So I think that we have had quite a few technical conversations, and before we get into some of these innovations, I'd like to lay the foundation for the entire conversation as to why. And so the first question that I'd like to pose is, why is it important that Bitcoin kind of goes away and trends away from this ossification of just being a store of value and payments rail and kind of scales with more programmability into this modular fashion?
One reason I've heard is that there's a security budget concern and that the chain needs more revenue from usage, and L2s are a way to get that.
For me, it's like, why would I leave a $1 trillion asset just resting as idle capital? And I would want to deploy it from passive to productive and make that be a productive asset. And by going modular, at least I have the shot of Bitcoin DeFi, which might be the most promising thing in the industry.
Yeah, I think it's like just combination of both, where you need, like, people want to use Bitcoin and Bitcoiners want people to use Bitcoin as well. But if there's no option to use, and if there is a security budget, if you just buy and hold your Bitcoin and usually in custodial wallets, then Bitcoin won't even get the adoption that people want. So we need more stuff to do with our Bitcoin.
And we're at the point that the miner subsidy is essentially going to go down by like 2040. It's unaffordable to mine. So without having more transactions coming on Bitcoin, whether it be L1 or L2s rolling up to the L1, Bitcoin may ultimately lose its store of value if we don't create transactions.
Also, ETH holders have always had the ability to access financial services while while maintaining self-custody using protocols like Liquidity that don't have governance to borrow USD against their holdings. Bitcoiners have had to use things like Celsius that are centralized garbage.
Yeah, the ETF was like this great enabler of institutional capital, but also simultaneously now like an enemy of these on-chain protocols now.
It's one of the shittiest things to have a Bitcoin ETF because now all the Bitcoin is held with BlackRock. Nobody wants custodied Bitcoin.
Yeah, like the BlackRock Bitcoin is not real Bitcoin. It is just the representation of your Bitcoin that they hold in custody. So it's no different than holding a fiat currency at all. I think, it's one of the bad things happened to Bitcoin recently, because it makes people think, okay, I will just BlackRock Bitcoin, and it's the same Bitcoin, it should be fine. But it's the worst way to onboard people to Bitcoin, because they cannot get out of BlackRock immediately without paying all these fees, and without just relieving and leaving their Bitcoin to custody of BlackRock.
The purpose of cryptocurrency is self-custody. And it's okay if you want to invest in something without using it, but it needs to still be able to serve its purpose.
So is it like an education thing, or is it just the technology hasn't been there for the last couple of years in terms of Bitcoin, and so now it's with what you guys have been with Stacks, Citrea, et cetera, there's we're building the rails to enable this kind of movement from custodied assets to kind of on-chain Bitcoin.
I think it's also social, the community changed a lot over the years, and now everyone was cheering for ETFs, but no one wanted to build stuff. People just didn't want to improve existing things, didn't want to do another script soft fork, or didn't want rollups, didn't want payment channels other than Lightning. And they simply wanted ETF to be passed in the United States, and that's very, very bad for Bitcoin social consensus and governance for the next couple of years as well.
I felt like the culture of Bitcoin over the last, not recent, but 10 years prior had been pretty Puritan, pretty challenging to work with, but anything that changes Bitcoin was not going to be allowed whatsoever. And with the influx of ordinals and the idea of Bitcoin DeFi, people have actually thought that I should use my Bitcoin and actually deploy it as opposed to just leave it held forever. And as you kind of go further, the more and more of these activities and dApps that are being built, now more and more L2s are coming forward and going, we're going to build the rails and such to make it possible.
I have a question. Can I ask a question, or do you have to ask all the questions?
Please ask a question.
Does Bitcoin need to change to support L2s, or can it just support L2s right now?
I don't actually think it needs to change like fundamentally, like it could stay as is, but if you would want it to have some improvements like OpCat or something like that, ultimately that would be great. But fundamentally it's fine as is.
If it is not extremely like kind of basic talk or document, I don't call Citra Bitcoin L2 because it's not. L2 needs to enable unilateral assets, which only today like solutions like Arc and Lightning enables, but with other soft forks like Cat, we can build rollups with unilateral exits. Citra is still a ZK rollup, but it is not fully L2 if you just accept the like L2 term as enabling non-custodial and unilateral exits.
Do you need OPCat to trustlessly verify snarks, or is there some version of BitVM that is trustless without needing OPCat?
There is a version with permissionless verification, but it's still not trustless. So there's a trustless setup involved in that as well.
And Bitcoin's not really meant to be a data availability layer. I think the block size is 1 megabit, four, sorry. The idea behind using Bitcoin as a data availability layer is the most secure design, but not necessarily the most practical. Like when you're thinking about designing your solution at Citra, how are you coming to the idea of wanting to use Bitcoin as a data availability layer versus something like Celestia?
I think the initial point that I did my talk was also like we came to Bitcoin with like ordinals and started exploring around and decided to build something. And around that time, like BRC20's ordinals were going crazy, but there was no much activity on Stacks, Rootstock, and other existing solutions. And then we think, like, what could be the reason? And I think people don't want an alternative block space. They want to use Bitcoin block space with more stuff. So if you are just creating a sidechain, then you are creating another block space that people pay, and the revenues usually don't go to miners, or they just go to the pools, but not individual miners. And most importantly, they don't get the security, full security of Bitcoin. So using Bitcoin as DA is the only way to get full Bitcoin security if your solution requires DA. If it is Lightning, then you are not using Bitcoin as DA because you don't have DA problem. But if you are building a rollup, then in order to be a rollup, you should use Bitcoin DA. That's the most secure version. It is definitely not the most scalable version. You cannot do 1,000 TPS or like 10,000 TPS using Bitcoin DA because of the true output limits, data limits. But I think we should start with the most secure way and then prioritize scaling afterwards. That's why we have this volition model in the roadmap where we enable off-chain data and on-chain data at the same time, so people have the option to choose. But if you just build a Validium or Optimium on Bitcoin, now you have another security assumption which didn't work out for like more than 10 years.
Rana, do you have anything to add about the comment on the block space side of things?
I mean, I would love to see the block space increase, but that's more for like my own volition. I don't think any other Bitcoiner would be agreed with that. But from the DA perspective, I do believe like for the Stacks L2, like we use Bitcoin Core, like that layer of DA for our solution. We don't want to go off chain and use another block space per se. So I kind of agree.
I think every rollup should use its base layer for DA. That's the most secure way to do it. But with 4 megabytes, that's just not enough for really high TPS. And so we're working on an initiative to easily integrate Celestia with Bitcoin L2s.
And as far as the technical lift for that, how different is that compared to integrating Celestia with Ethereum rollups?
Well, we have ZK proofs that prove the state of the DA bridge, and we have that for many different kinds of proof system working already. And so integrations to all kinds of weird chains are pretty much just a pretty low lift because we just have to get those proofs verified on whatever the execution layer is.
Got it. I think there's kind of this divergent path happening here with BitVM and OPCat, and as a builder in the space, you're kind of looking at the future of Bitcoin scaling, and perhaps even unsure as to when and how this is going to kind of play out from the perspective of building stacks and Citria. How are you guys thinking about the next 6 to 12 months in the Bitcoin space, and like kind of setting your sights on your project moving forward, but also just kind of the entire ecosystem as a whole developing more?
I think we are not here to like just develop a base layer like EVM that people can do some stuff. We are here to like onboard developers to Bitcoin with EVM so that they don't have to learn new stuff to build Bitcoin applications. I think, yeah, just building the infra is fine. You should build the best infra, the most secure infra, most scalable infra. But if you don't have the developers to develop on, it's very challenging to get the adoption that you need from users as well. Because like people want to use some applications. They don't want to use your chain for nothing. I think for applications, it's very great opportunity because you have like all these EVM layers on Ethereum and other L1s, but there's very, very minimal value if you simply, like, you just count Ethereum as a native asset, but all the native assets of the chains, they simply lock and like on investor wallets or founder wallets, so it's not very liquid asset that you can use, and there is not much market cap for them. But today, Bitcoin has more than 50% of cryptocurrency market cap, and most of Bitcoin is unlocked. There are only like couple in ETF wallets, couple in institutions, couple lost Satoshi wallet, and like empty Goxec or whatever. But most of the Bitcoin belongs to individuals, and now we have the ability to build applications, and these individuals now have the chance to use that application, so they can simply use their Bitcoin in action. And this is just great opportunity for developers now. You have more users with more capital, and they never used any of these products before.
On the BitVM side, I think it's pretty well known that Stacks is funding all of BitVM's research right now, and so we fundamentally believe that this would be the solution to bring our L2 from trust minimized to trustless. That's the state that we're trying to get into, and we're getting ready for the Stacks hard fork this fall. This will bring us to having a faster block time to be about 5 to 10 seconds. And so we still 100% use the Bitcoin security budget. So every one Bitcoin block, that's the only time that you're basically not confirmed on the L2, but then you roll up back into the L1. And then from there on out, we are working on a kind of generic restaking layer for Bitcoin. So the idea of lock on the L1, deploy on the L2, use the entire security budget of BTC, the L1 asset, but then all of the other BTC derivatives like BBTC, WBTC, and such. And so that all of that aggregated security budget could be deployed on top.
Are you finding that the community is kind of split in its focus in that sense? Like Eric was just up here extremely excited about OPCat. The Botanics team is pushing that forward, but then build on Bitcoin. You guys, others are much more focused on BitVM. Like how are you thinking about this kind of divergence of focus?
I think there's a couple ways to go about it, but for us, we really wanted to focus on something that brought us to trustless, like in a full decentralized state. OPCat had a lot of functionality that we could use, but it didn't ultimately give us the bridge that we needed. And so we just chose that direction. I'm sure it's a matter of time before we integrate both, but we're starting with one because BitVM is still quite a bit ways out to actually be deployed.
I think there are like a couple approaches here. Eric and his company mainly like focus on something that we will get in the future. Instead, we just like choose right now we should focus what we have on Bitcoin. And if needed, we can push for other things like CAT or direct ZKP verifier opcode. But right now we have BitVM, and it is the most trust minimized way that you can verify a ZK proof on Bitcoin. That's why we are like heavily working on it on our own fork called Clementine. I think, yeah, our rollup architecture is very agnostic, so the Citria repository in our GitHub is just a sovereign ZK rollup, and the Clementine is kind of external bridge that provides view of the L1 and facilitates all the bridges. So if there is an opget activated, let's say tomorrow, then it should be easier for us to just convert our Clementine program ZK verifier script from this long BitVM program to a script that verifies Stark using OPCAT. So it is very easy for us to integrate OPCAT when it's come. It's obvious like Bitcoin governance takes so much time, so we have more time to integrate. But if it already happens like tomorrow, then we can easily convert to that. And yeah, CAT enables Stark verification on the L1 under the block size, so it should be feasible to use to make this rollup trustless. But right now we don't have it, so it is not much of a focus for us right now.
Just a interesting fact. BitVM2, it has a trusted setup, right? So you have some group of people who create the setup, and as long as one of them is honest, then you can trust it, and you can theoretically make it very big, right? You could maybe get 1,000 people in that. Yeah. That is already the trust assumption of a snark. That's already the trust assumption of a Plonk or Groth16 ZK proof, and a Stark doesn't have that trusted setup, but it's not so bad to have a trusted setup if what you're verifying on chain is a snark. It's the same, and it's not bad. A 1 out of 1,000 honest is pretty good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Our current proofs are just Stark proofs that produced by RISC-0, but we essentially wrapping them to FF long to verify in BitVM, and it's already a one-of-an assumption. Our challenge is not permissionless. We don't have trustless setup, but we have permissioned verifiers. So it is still the same trust assumption with FF long because it requires only one like universal setup for the circuit. But yeah, if we had OPCAT, then we could directly use our already existing Stark proofs to directly verify on Bitcoin without this one-of-an assumption. So instead of trust minimize, it will be fully trustless.
Yeah, and from my understanding, as of now, it's basically the best case is optimistically verifying any ZK proofs until we get to the actual verifier itself. Kind of zooming out a little bit, thinking about Bitcoin going modular, I think we see the supply side coming. I think I've heard there's upwards of 100 L2s or kind of side chains, et cetera. And this is going to keep scaling. But where do you guys anticipate the demand side for these Bitcoin rollups coming from, or these Bitcoin L2s, and who do you guys think are going to be communities and users who will want to participate in these ecosystems? And maybe Reina, you can go first, seeing Stacks is already flourishing.
For us, it's primarily the growing DeFi ecosystem. There really isn't a DeFi ecosystem in Bitcoin, and so we are kind of building all the infrastructure tools in place for liquidity protocols, DEXs and such, all kind of coming in. We've already been early adopters of building for BRC20s and runes and ordinals, but now kind of focusing back on Stacks core. I don't know how many people know Stacks, but we're one of the few L2s that can read and write to Bitcoin native state. And so it's a little bit of a unique value proposition that as you code in Clarity, which is our language that's essentially Rust-based, you always get to read Bitcoin native state and then write back. And very few are able to do that. As we kind of go further, we fundamentally believe that there is going to be hundreds of L2s that are going to go in different directions, but we only want to focus on DeFi, and that's it. We already have about 5 billion locked on chain as is. It's our entire ecosystem because we've been doing this for many years. And we think that there could be hundreds, probably 4 or 5 will stick around to get to the 100, 200 billion mark.
How much of the 5 billion is staked, like active in the ecosystem, and how much is locked in proof of transfer consensus?
Yeah, so for staking, like our version of staking, stacking, whatever you want to call it, that's locked, we have about 3.5 billion locked, and then the other 1.5 billion is locked, or not locked, but deployed directly via contracts.
Okay. I think like from our side, demand is a bit tricky. If you are building just like a rollup, you don't have to have extreme demand to cover your expenses because you don't have much expense. If there's transactions, then they already pay the fee, so you pay the DA fee, you pay the proving fee, but you don't need anything extra. But the staking is a bit tricky, like stuff like Babylon. There are a lot of Bitcoin and people want to get yield on, and they want to get like 4 or 5% maybe yield with their Bitcoin. But if there is no usage on the other side, who will pay those fees. Like there are many proof of stake chains that is now just inflating their token to pay money to like stakers. And if they want to use Babylon, they should also pay Babylon so that Babylon can pay to his stakers. But it's not the reality. There's not much demand on chain right now. So I think instead of focusing Bitcoin staking stuff, first we need to ensure that there's a health ecosystem that we built and proved, and then we can focus on like this kind of staking related stuff, and people can build applications. So there will be enough demand to pay these stakers and kind of securing the crypto economic security itself.
Okay, cool. I kind of want to go back into the technical side of things, if that's all right. And I had a last question about the optimistically proven or verified ZK proofs, and then now with the rise of ZK VMs like Risk0 and Succinct and others kind of coming onto the market, I'm curious how you think This is going to play a part in the Bitcoin L2 space and kind of scaling Bitcoin in a modular way using these ZK VMs.
I think ZK VMs are like making developments maybe 2 times better than it was before. You had this client, like let's say EVM, and you write the client from scratch, and then you write all of the circuits from scratch as well. So that, and each time you update one, you have to update both. So you're just maintaining 2 different software. But with ZK VMs, you simply have a Rust or C++ code base, and you are only maintaining it. And once it changed, the ZK circuit already changed automatically through this Risk0 or SP1 or other alternatives coming to market. And specifically for Bitcoin, I think there can be some also product market fit, because ZKP has actually like started talking in Bitcoin during Satoshi's time, but it never got implemented. And the first on-chain ZKP was zero-knowledge contingent payments by Greg Maxwell, I think in 2016. And they simply handwrite all the circuits. But right now, there are not many people on Bitcoin, and developers, they don't know how to code circuits. They usually write C++ or Rust. So these ZK VMs has another special market fit in Bitcoin as well, because it's not so popular. The zero-knowledge is not quite popular compared to the Ethereum.
So I know Sovereign's doing a lot of great work here. I think Jem unfortunately wasn't able to make it. But from what I gather, I think that the ZK VM side of things is going to help immensely on the interoperability aspect of scaling Bitcoin. I think we've talked, I feel like, endlessly at this conference about kind of this fragmentation problem and how ZK is the end game, but I think it's all the more relevant here now in the Bitcoin space, and being able to bring these ZK proofs and generate them fast and cheaply is going to continue to help to scale the space. But ultimately, until we get BitVM, it's still going to be kind of talking about what is happening here. Conrad, I'd like to ask you kind of about Blobstream and how you see Celestia's Blobstream DA solution being implemented into some of these Bitcoin scaling solutions, and kind of where you guys are at with that.
The way it's probably going to work is there's probably going to be a Blobstream snark that runs alongside the rollups execution proof, and then when they go to verify with BitVM or something, it'll verify an aggregation circuit that aggregates those 2. And to prevent them from needing to all waste data waste fees by like writing the same updates that are Blobstream related onto Bitcoin, we'll probably want to figure out some way that we can just inscribe proofs on Bitcoin once and then let all the Bitcoin L2s create their proofs based on what Blobstream data gets inscribed in the Bitcoin block. And so the idea there is that it's just something that kind of like will provide an SDK for the various Bitcoin VMs and the rollups who consume it.
On the inscription side, are the limitations there mostly the cost of the inscribing, or is it kind of the time to settle those blocks?
I have no idea what it costs to inscribe something in Bitcoin, but we don't have to do it once per Celestia block. You only need to do it as fast as the rollups demand those updates. On Ethereum, I believe this is quite slow. I think we do like at least dozens, if not hundreds, of Celestia blocks before we update Blobstream. Although the rollups can force update as fast as they need, but then they have to pay for it.
So looking at the OPCAT landscape, Eric mentioned this and said that it's been talked about quite a bit, and it's this idea of Bitcoin's ossification and immutability lies in its kind of in its simpleness, in its limited execution. OPCAT brings in a next level of programmability, and there's speculation of where this can take effect on the base layer. I'm curious if you guys are actually speculating that there's going to be centralization of either building blocks or mining pools as a result of OPCAT, and any other ramifications that you guys are kind of going through in your minds.
The proposed code for OPCAT is already like preventing all of the DOS attacks that existed before for OPCAT, and you already have this 4 megabyte block limit, so it is not changing much in terms of the effect on builders or effect on nodes. It's the same blockchain with one additional script opcode enabled. So I don't expect it should be add any additional burden to anyone. And I also think building with OPCAT is hard enough. So you have to just write all this 1,000 line of script to just verify a Merkle proof. So I believe there will be kind of shared Stark verifier built with OPCAT, and people will simply build ZK circuits instead of writing Bitcoin scripts. So instead of just doing all the Merkle tree verification with CAT, then light client verification with CAT, you can simply write them in Rust and use the existed Stark verifier already embedded in Bitcoin as a UTXO. So I think CAT is not very practical to develop. But if you just develop a Stark verifier, then you should be fine. So you can use any other code to just create the proof and verify in Bitcoin.
I think we're already at finer centralization as is after the last halving. I don't think there's more than 8 major players mining, and then you have tinier pools. I used to run a mining pool in 2012, and at that time and point, anyone could be a miner and just run it straight from your GPU, but now it's not even possible. Miners are very excited, candidly, about OPCAT because of the functionalities coming to be a little bit more fully expressive on Bitcoin script to feel closer to smart contracts, what you have in other ecosystems and such. When you have all those transactions coming in, more fees are coming because miners are validating these blocks, and so for them, it's thankful. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I think from ordinals from December 2022 till now, ordinals have generated at least a couple $100 million in mining revenue that miners didn't see before. And so as we continue going through halving cycles, again, in another 4 years, miners will be depending on these transactions coming through, especially through OPCAT, in order to sustain themselves. Otherwise, the Bitcoin blockchain kind of fails.
Yeah, I mean, as we see more transactions come in, hash rate keep increasing, I think that the argument might actually be that the competition for mining is going to just continue to increase. New players could even come onto the market, which I think is going to be ultimately extremely positive for the Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole in terms of the generation of fees. But yeah, now miners are making more than, I think it's in 2017, there was one spike, I remember, where Bitcoin fees were extremely expensive just to send, but now it's like that, throughout each day.
That and it actually made people using the Bitcoin blockchain. If you think about it, it took until 2024 to hit 1 billion transactions in Bitcoin, whereas Solana hit 1 billion transactions in 2022, Ethereum hit them in 2021, but Bitcoin, oldest blockchain, not until now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking about this kind of divergent path earlier and kind of how the community is at a bit of a fork in the road, but seemingly if OPCAT goes through, the expansion of this Bitcoin ecosystem, this Bitcoin going modular will just be, I think, cemented for sure. And I think that the community is still, as I've said, split, but I'm thinking that they're getting a bit more open to it. And recently I saw a proposal from, I think his name is Patrick, I'm unfortunately forgetting his last name, but he proposed basically this idea of a sidecar next to the Bitcoin blockchain that basically after a certain amount of time, it basically copies the Bitcoin blocks, and they've thought to get the Bitcoin core to kind of support that, and then eventually run OPCAT on that sidecar to kind of like experiment with it, and then if core can support it, then the miners would basically be willing to support it as well at some point and kind of put those two together. But I don't know if you guys have seen that, or if you guys have any other thoughts on kind of like the proper implementation of OPCAT.
I think it was Paul's source of like author of the drive chain proposal, and that idea looks like you don't have to change Bitcoin Core. So instead, you just run a sidecar to like signal and activate a soft fork, including miners and nodes. I don't know too much details. I haven't taken a look to the code as well. But if there's like not much hash rate required by it, it might be smart. But if there is already like requiring majority of hash rate, it will be hard to use it. I think his main target is enable drive chains, not CAT at all. So it should be like just focused on drive chains for now. For OPCAT, I think we just need like to enable the activation client, just code some activation client and start signaling OPCAT. But today, yeah, individuals are like pushing, just like Taproot Wizards and like a couple of companies, but there should be, I think, some bigger consensus in also like in social places, not only just developer forums, to push OPCAT one step further. But right now, there's no such consensus in Bitcoin yet.
Yeah, I think that the soft fork is the hurdle. And you mentioned that he's from Drive Chains, Paul? Yeah, I think that the idea of doing the soft fork is kind of the community's hurdle, right? And but the community's changing. And Connor, I think you've been in this space for quite a while. More broadly, how have you seen the Bitcoin community kind of change now and adapt to this kind of modular mindset, if you will, of bringing programmability in?
Well, at the beginning of this panel, she said she is in favor of raising the block size as a Bitcoin maximalist.
I wouldn't call myself a pure maxi, but
okay.
realistically, I would like to see it raised.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, that would have been unthinkable a few years back. So I think that it has changed massively. Also, the talk of new opcodes going in is pretty crazy. And it seems like it actually is going to pass, which is also pretty unthinkable, such significant changes. Bitcoin seems wildly different than it used to be.
Like, for perspective, our last fork was like Taproot and SegWit, and that was so many years ago, and now we're getting to L2 movement, OpCat, BitVM, all of these soft forks to come, and no one's really pushing back saying don't do it.
Yeah, and that was the Bitcoin Cash 8 megabits blocks, or
Yeah, like the block wars from like, well, the early days.
the first airdrop ever, the original airdrop. What's funny though is that I think this is completely off of Bitcoin, but in Ethereum, the base rollups idea was kind of pushed by Ethereum Foundation and Justin Drake and others, and I think it's one of the first things that is kind of being pushed back on quite heavily by the broader community, or at least being topically discussed. Whereas in Bitcoin, it feels like this idea is kind of stemming from some core community members and people that are working in this space, and it's being broadly accepted. So I don't know, just thought that was an interesting kind of paradox happening now.
I think it's like not so accepted on Bitcoin, maybe even forced more than like the Ethereum side, because people simply don't want too much MEV on Bitcoin L1 with miners. It already exists with ordinals, runes, PRC20s, whatever, but they don't want even more MEV on L1. And with just like vanilla-based rollups, they just activate heavily MEV on the L1. So that was the one thing that people told me, like, oh, you are building rollup, then you are just creating MEV on L1. But rollups like us, starting with single sequencer, they don't leak any single MEV to the L1 because all the consensus, the transaction order happened on the L2. And once we implement this sequencer mechanism, the decentralized sequencer mechanism, it will also keep on the L2, not leak on the L1. But if you just build a base, just vanilla-based rollup on Bitcoin, it will enable MEV a lot, and you will receive a lot of pushbacks.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation. I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing Bitcoin's community and kind of this what some could have called like a mind virus in terms of the way that people had thought about Bitcoin in the past in terms of the ossification, now kind of expanding it and going more modular and just bringing more programmability. So thank you guys for this awesome panel, and give it up for a round of applause, please.